welcome to today's podcast episode. And this is going to be a continuation, actually, from the previous one when I was discussing a little bit about what was going on between the Teamsters and UPS. Now, interestingly enough, since that video or podcast episode, depending on how you consume your content, audio or video, since that podcast episode came out, it actually got significant traction. I was surprised. And I'm genuinely a naturally curious person anyway. I like to take deep dives. It's also why I'm kind of bullish on podcast content in the first place, because what it does is it allows podcasters and individuals to, let's say, look at or just quite frankly talk about some things that a lot of other people are not, they might be interested in hearing, but maybe they're not interested in doing any of the analysis or something to that effect. And so I thought, well, let me go ahead and see where things are at, and I'll reference a couple of different articles, and then we'll just kind of look, take a deeper dive, if you will, into what we got going on. So the last podcast episode then saw the Teamsters, and they were suing UPS, saying it was a breach of their contract. And there was a couple of different comments in the podcast episode where individuals were saying, hey, they let's say missed the mark, because what they should have done is sued in when the previous buyout took place. To which I, kind of nodded, hey, listen, if that is the case, then yeah, that probably should have gone to court. But I know it's a sticky situation whenever you have to involve any kind of, whenever you're involved in any kind of litigation. Number one, it's costly. Number two, if the offer is in this particular case here, if the offer is not substantial enough, then you might say, I'm not going to go ahead and pursue litigation. I'm not saying that's what they did. I'm just saying that that's where my mind goes when I begin to contemplate this. The one thing that I can say is that on the UPSers, the subreddit on Reddit, there's been a lot of chatter here recently. And one of the things that I saw was where they were closing different centers down. Look, and I get that, you have to modernize and all that kind of stuff. But there's some things here that I find interesting. Number one, I think that the buyout terms, I think it's $150,000, which we'll look into in a couple of the articles here. But number one, I suppose at the crux of it all, you could just say, well, I'm not offering you anything. I'm cutting you loose. Listen, those of us in the construction industry certainly know what that's like. Happens all the time. The job gets over and they just kind of, you're done. But the way that our collective bargaining agreement is structured is dramatically different than the way that the Teamsters have it with the UPS. Case in point, we are a multi-employer. We're under a multi-employer construction collective bargaining agreement, excuse me. And what that really means is that, multiple employers have signed on. Whereas with the Teamsters, it's entered into, it's a single employer contract is basically what it is, right? It's the Teamsters and UPS. So number one, on the face of it, they could just say, hey, look, we're closing down. We're shutting up for those drivers that we're going to transfer. We're going to transfer or jobs, and then we're going to close facilities or whatever the case may be. So that's an interesting perspective that as somebody in the construction industry, I don't know what that's like, right? I don't know what it's like to have a buyout, if you will, and just, kind of culling the workforce a little bit. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, I'm a natural skeptic in a lot of ways. And so one of the things that I think is taking place is, while they may very well be looking to, let's say, cut the numbers down, okay, and take it from however many they've got, they want to dramatically reduce because of X, Y, and Z, which we'll look at in a couple of these articles. I'm also of the opinion, personal opinion here, that a company like UPS, I think what they're ultimately doing, aside from this over here, which is reducing the number, I think they're playing chess when it comes to, okay, well, how do I make the union look bad? You can be a union company, union signatory company, and have anti-union management or anti-union sentiment that is driving policies and the like, right? Last video, I specifically mentioned $1 billion in stock buyback, and I really wanted to put a little bit of a focus on this because I find it's almost it should be illegal, quite frankly. Stock buybacks used to be illegal. They really should go back to being illegal. What you're doing is you're manipulating stock. You have a way to make yourself seem a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a reason they were illegal in the first place. They were widely considered, let's say, market manipulation. It's precisely what it ultimately takes place. And so when you're doing all this stuff, you can have companies that are signatory, but your senior management, for one reason or the other, has a very anti-union sentiment. That's what I kind of believe is taking place here, right? So when you go to a driver and you say, "Well, look, I'm trying to offer you this buyout. Look at what the union's doing." On the tail end of this is also like this overarching plan. Whereas if I get rid of or if I dramatically reduce the numbers of drivers that I've got, especially the ones that have been around for a long time, that know how the company runs, that are, let's say, pro union, one of the reasons why, right, is because you've been there long enough to experience the great benefits, to experience the way that a company can run, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when I start dropping these individuals off and whatnot, what am I looking at doing? I'm weakening support to a significant degree for individuals who are union. Which, by the way, I might also add, they're the ones who negotiate for the significant benefits that many of the people enjoy now. And this is one of the things where you get into a specific perspective where individuals are like, we forget what brought us here. And so we're more enticed by the propaganda, the lies, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, right, while we're sitting here talking about a buyout, and there are a lot of drivers who are like, I'm gone, I'm taking this buyout. The long range play from where I'm sitting is what UPS is ultimately looking to do, which is significantly weaken the union because, well, if I'm looking for a way to, make as much money as possible, how do I do that? Well, here's what I can do. I can sit here and squeeze my employees. And I can do that through a number of ways, right? So without, it's just kind of my framework about where my thought process is when I look at this. The anti-union business is a significant the amount of money that they make, quite frankly, is first off the number one the amount of money they charge is pretty astronomical. It's a significantly large business that you're instead of like investing in your employees or whatever, you spend all that money on consultants so that you can sit here and make unions look bad, et cetera, et cetera. And then so then what happens is, right, we as individuals, we sit here and lament and we look back and we say, well, what happened to all these good paying jobs? Well, we kind of let it get watered down, if you will. Anyway, not to take too much away from this podcast episode, it's just where my sentiment is and where I think things are going. I think they're ultimately trying to water down support. All right, so article number 1 from Supply Chain Diet. Now, I'm going to have 2 different articles I'm going to read just like I did in the last podcast episode. So I'll try to make sure that I, number 1, reference the actual quotes by saying quote in the article. And I'll also list the two documents, if you will, that I'm going to reference in the comment section so that anybody wants to go back and check. This one was published, actually, today is the 25th or the 26th. Today is the 27th. I'm sorry. I was wrong on both accounts. Now, today's Friday, February 27th, so this was written 4 days ago on the 23rd, but this is UPS driver buyouts. Court denies Teamsters plea to halt rollout. Quote, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters push to halt UPS's next round of driver buyouts was denied in the U.S. District Court of Massachusetts, paving the way for the carrier to offer $150,000 separation payments to thousands of employees. The Teamsters failed to, the Teamsters, and this is where they quote, the Teamsters, quote inside of a quote, failed to show that it will suffer irreparable harm in the absence of an injunction, i.e., that any arbitration would be rendered meaningless in the absence of the requested injunction relief, end quote, right? Chief U.S. District Judge Denise J. Casper said in an order filed Friday. She added that cases warranting the issuance of a labor injunction are rare. Casper's ruling comes less than a month after UPS publicly revealed plans to deploy a voluntary buyout program for full-time U.S. drivers. UPS is pushing to reduce its employee ranks as it adjusts to fewer packages from Amazon and starts to hand off more ground saver shipments to the U.S. Postal Service for delivery. Now, I'm going to interrupt here for 1 second, the article that is, and provide just a little bit of what I find interesting comment, which is that they're looking, it says that they're adjusting to fewer packages from Amazon. This was an intentional choice, by the way. This was, I think, because I was very curious about what was going on with Amazon and whatnot. And so I was looking it up, and I was looking up the UPS too. And it was that there was an article that I looked at. I didn't reference it, I don't think. But there was a specific and intentional choice from UPS, and this was a few years ago, to focus on what they called, I think it's more higher volume, right? And they were looking at and like specifically focusing on, let's say, smaller businesses and the like. So this was a deliberate choice by UPS. I'd have to look back and see what that article is, and if I can find it, I'll also post that in the comments. But just little food for thought caveat there. All right, going back to the article, and this is a quote within a quote. We are pleased with the court's ruling and intend to move forward with our driver choice program as originally planned, end quote, UPS said in an email statement to Supply Chain Dive. The Teamsters, which represent 80% of UPS's roughly 370,000 U.S. employees, filed a lawsuit earlier this month seeking a temporary restraining order on the buyout rollout. The union argued that the program would violate the Teamsters labor contract with UPS. About 105,000 UPS drivers would be eligible for the $150,000 lump sum payment packages, which would be in addition to any retirement benefits earned. Interesting. UPS had planned for the buyout enrollment window to run from February 13th to March 12th, with separation starting around April 26th per Casper's order. It's unclear to what extent the timing of the buyout program could shift due to the court case. UPS said it would share further details about the offer to its drivers over the coming days. UPS deployed a similar separation program in 2025. About 3,000 of the nearly 115,000 drivers eligible accepted last year's buyout offer per Casper's order. Counsel for the Teamsters said during a hearing in the U.S. District Court of Massachusetts case that the new buyout program could lead to a larger number of employees leaving, and noted that UPS has not established, quote, aggressive or location-specific caps on program participation, end quote, according to Casper. Quote, setting aside the speculative nature of this argument, it does not impact an arbitrator's authority to remedy the harms alleged, even as the court recognizes that it could make any remedy more difficult to implement, end quote, Casper said. The Teamsters did not respond to a request for comment on Friday's orders. So I'm going to go back and read, because that's the end of the article. But there is a quote here, right? The last one. Setting aside the speculative nature of this argument, which was the Teamsters argument, it does not impact an arbitrator's authority to remedy the harms alleged. Meaning, and this is the other article we'll reference. I wanted to do a little bit of deeper dive. The other article that I'm going to read from Reuters actually talked about this very thing. Like, what is this the harms alleged and the arbitrator's authority to remedy the harms, right? Which we'll get into. But I want you to kind of keep that on the back burner when we go to this next article from Reuters. All right. Now, scrolling up to get to the top of the article here, and we're going to get down to same day, February 23rd. So, what is likely to have happened is the court came out, and then just a flood of, let's say, mainstream media, if you will, or online media, however you would like to term it, decided to, obviously put out the news there about this whole lawsuit and the fact that it was basically what it said was go to arbitration. So, Boston in February 23rd of 2026 from Reuters, quote, and we'll just go on through. United Parcel Service on Monday said it plans to proceed with offering $150,000 buyout packages to its drivers after a federal judge rejected a bid by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Union to block its workforce cutting program. Chief U.S. District Judge Denise Casper in Boston on Friday rejected a request from an injunction sought by the Teamsters, which represents more than 320,000 UPS workers, and had accused the company of violating its 2023 labor contract. The Teamsters had asked Casper to block the buyout program while an arbitrator decides if UPS has the authority to implement it, saying absent an injunction, any victory it won would be rendered hollow, as the arbitrator would face an impossible task of reinstating employees. But Casper said the union's arguments rested on a flawed interpretation of its labor contract, which she said gave an arbitrator the power to void any contracts UPS enters with its employees that conflict with its bargaining agreement. Okay, so let's camp here for 1 second, because this is what I was referring to in the other article. What the judge basically said was this. UPS is being sued, or they were being sued, right? Teamsters were trying to get an injunction. What they were saying is, look, let's go ahead and halt the proposed buyout program. And people have all kinds of reasons or thought processes as to why this is the case. Some of the more cynical ones have their own perspective. Some of the more level-headed or individuals who see the whole thing, or at least, believe they're seeing more of a picture, have their own perspective as well. Setting that aside for 1 second, let's look at what's actually taking place, which is we go into the court case and we seek an injunction. And what the Teamsters are saying is, to a large degree, is kind of right. If you go ahead with this and you allow the buyouts, all right, you are, they are kind of right? You are electing to allow the company to enter into a contract, because that's what that is. The second that you take the buyout and the second that you sign saying, I'm not going to come work for you anymore, that is, no surprise there, a contract. And so what you're doing then is you're allowing the company to enter into a contract, whether it's a buyout. You can say whatever you want. It is a contract because you're signing saying, hey, I'm not going to come work for you anymore and I'm going to move on. You are, if when the smoke clears, when the dust settles and the smoke clears, if it's determined that this was illegal, however you want to, forget about the means for a second. Just think about the concept. If it's rendered illegal, do you know how difficult this is to fix? Do you know how difficult this is? It's next to an impossible task. They are right about this. And I will tell you why. Because what they are, let's say, basically projecting is what happens to a lot of employees who are summarily dismissed from numerous companies across the country when they seek to unionize. They are effectively, right? Technically, you're not supposed to be able to be fired, but this is what happens. You work in, let's say, a right to work state, or somebody just comes up with some nonsense, dismisses you. You can go and you can file and you can try to get reinstated and back pay and all this kind of stuff. But the National Labor Relations Board is in many ways They have been significantly watered down from the way it was actually implemented, years and years and years ago during the Roosevelt administration. And this idea of trying to reinstate an employee after the smoke is settled it's so difficult to do. It's so difficult to right the wrongs. It's so difficult to reinstate someone if they didn't want to take it. Now, the argument, of course, is that there are people who want to take the buyout. I am seeing on the Reddit, on the subreddit, excuse me. I'm seeing the comments. I'm seeing some of the comments on, some of my own social media posts and different things like that, where individuals are looking to take the buyout. So that would be the counter. They would say, "Hey, look, this isn't something that they're forcing on us. This is something that we can voluntarily take." That would be the counter to that. At the end of it all, it still goes back to what I said in the previous podcast episode, which is this: it is a contract. If UPS has entered into a contract with the Teamsters, the bargaining agreement is what is at stake here. Now, to give credit to the person that commented on the video and said, "Hey, UPS should have done something," or they messed up, if you will, by not saying anything about the first buyout. Granted, I tip my hat to you, because you're absolutely right. What they should have done when that buyout came along is they should have probably taken them to court. They should have, because you set precedent then. Now, I'm not saying it's a very difficult thing. And recall back in earlier at the beginning of this podcast, I said it costs money. It does cost money whenever you enter into, arbitration, or, even whenever you are litigating anything, you're going to spend money. So, but in the realm of contract protection, which is what it is, I'm going to allow, individuals to effectively break out of a contract and enter into a new contract with UPS saying, "You're going to take this buyout and you're going to go away," basically. "Sayonara, see you later." What you are doing, and some people don't like it, but what you are doing is you are allowing a company to break a contract. Now it sounds great, right? Because, hey, here I am spending money. It's a master play in a lot of ways when you start to think about a company that possibly could be run by anti-union sentiment and anti-union management. The long-term play is, look at what they're trying to keep us from offering you, the driver. Look at what, in long run, right? Long run, this is going to work out in UPS's favor. This is what this is what they're banking on. This is where I was said in the beginning of the video, where I'm kind of skeptical, and this is what I think is we're playing chess here, right? We're playing chess, while to some degree it seems like a lot of people at UPS might be playing checkers, because they really should have sued underneath the very first buyout and said, "You're breaking the contract." Speculation on my part, but they were probably banking on the fact that so many people, it was an abysmal offer, right? And so you're kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place. But this is what I think is taking place here. This is what I think is going on. Circling back to the article so that it has some merit for the previous points, the Teamsters had asked Casper to block the buyout program while an arbitrator decides if UPS has the authority to implement it, saying absent an injunction, any victory it won would be rendered hollow, as the arbitrator would face an impossible task of reinstating employees. But Casper said the union's arguments rested on a flawed interpretation of its labor contract, which she said gave an arbitrator the power to void any contracts UPS enters into with employees that conflict with its bargaining agreement. Now, I certainly want to keep this series going, because I'm intrigued as to what an actual arbitrator, when they get into the National Masters Agreement, what they'll say when it comes out with this, this buyout. Continuing on with this article, UPS in a statement welcomed the ruling and said it plans to move forward with the buyout program and share details with its drivers in the coming days. The Teamsters did not respond to a request for comment. The union sued on February 9th after UPS announced on January 27th that it plans to cut up to 30,000 jobs and shut 24 facilities as it moves away from millions of low-profit deliveries for its largest customer, online retailer Amazon.com. UPS is the largest employer of Teamster-represented workers in the United States. UPS rivals like FedEx and Amazon Logistics are non-unionized and offer lower pay for drivers and other delivery-related employees. The company said it wants to reduce its driver workforce to address an 8.6% decline in package deliveries last year, a drop it expects to continue in 2026 as UPS shifts away from high-volume, low-margin deliveries for its largest customer, Amazon. It cut 48,000 jobs in 2025, including through a buyout program it initiated in July that offered $1,800 in severance pay per year of service with a $10,000 minimum to eligible employees. Local unions oppose that buyout as well, and the Teamsters say UPS opted to try a second round of buyouts with a more lucrative payout after only 3,000 union members accepted the first round of buyouts. Willing to wager the first round of buyouts, the ones that took it, are probably kicking themselves right now. UPS's latest initiative, called the Driver Choice Program, would involve extending offers to 105,000 drivers to leave the company in exchange for $150,000 plus any retirement benefits earned, including pension and health care. The Teamsters lawyers said it expected over 10,000 of its members would accept buyouts under that program, which they contend was initiated without negotiations and violates provisions in its 2023 labor agreement that bar the company from entering into individual agreement with drivers. That is the crux right there. That's the crux. So again, going back to the contract, right? If UPS has actually entered into a contract and has said we'll source the employees from, the Teamsters are going to represent them, et cetera, it doesn't, at this point in time, as much as people don't like to hear it, if that is the case, then when you have let's say a company like UPS who goes, hey, look at this carrot I want to dangle in front of you, which is $150,000. It's something to shake a stick at. I'm willing to acknowledge that, right? But when they come through and they say, well, look at this right here. Let me dangle this carrot. And they say, look at what the union is keeping us from giving you. It's a master class in trying to make, let's say, it's a master class in making the Teamsters look bad or making unionism look bad in general. And to be blunt with you, those of us who know what's going on, who, let's say, can, kind of peel behind the veil a little bit and have a look, we know what's going on. We know that. And when you compare it to, let's say, FedEx or what Amazon is doing, right? I'll address that in one second. But when you look, you kind of peel behind the veil a little bit and you look at that, you see, look at this right here. I know what they're doing. I do fault them for it because what their sentiment is really significantly anti-union in that regard. And the answer, quite frankly, is if indeed it is a contract, they signed it and they're allowed to, let's say, buy people out, if you will. Again, I understand the sentiment that $150,000, it's nothing to shake a stick at. Totally understandable. Totally get it. I'm just saying that from a contract perspective, if you enter into a contract and then you are seeking to enter into a contract with individual members, it's 100%. I see where it's at. I can understand their perspective is what I'm getting at. The other thing that I would say, and it's kind of funny because when I look on Reddit, I'll see individuals commenting. is there's two other points in this podcast episode I want to address, and then I'll move on. Number one, the first thing that I would like to address is that if you are someone here that you're listening to this podcast episode and you happen to work for FedEx or Amazon, what I would tell you is maybe you should unionize. That's precisely what I would say. You should unionize. We have a ridiculous thing that we do, and I think maybe it's related to human nature, but you would look at some of the people that work for UPS that are represented by the Teamsters, and you would say, you guys make too much money. You guys make too much money. No, how about you probably don't make what you should make? Instead of tearing down other people, maybe you ought to come together and collectively organize and collectively bargain. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I want to address what I'll say are trolls, because that's all you really are a troll. When you comment on a video or a podcast episode, or you comment on a blog post or something like this, and you say, oh, well, the Teamsters and UPS, or the Teamsters, the UAW or whatever, all have done way more, for against the worker, not for the worker. You've done a lot more damage for the worker than the company, than any company. You were off your rocker. Let me say that as clear as I possibly can. You couldn't be more wrong. The reason that UPS, that the drivers have the benefits that they have, that the healthcare coverage that they have, which is commonly referred to as Cadillac coverage, the sheer amount of benefits that they've got, all of these things, job site conditions, everything. And I can extend this well beyond UPS into UAW, and I can extend it beyond UAW, and I can extend it into construction trades. I can extend it into just about any old face of unionism here. They have it because people came together collectively to negotiate for better. That's it. And they would not have that, most assuredly. If you need a history lesson on what conditions looked like 100 years ago when you had to fight for everything, there was no 8-hour workday or time and a half over 40 from the National Labor Relations Act that established that. There was none of that. And it was people collectively coming together to push and push and push and push and push. And what happens now is it's so easy for somebody to comment and be a troll and try to dunk on the union when in reality you wouldn't have the benefits that you've got. And you might be, and this is related to point number one, which is you might not even have the benefits in the first place. You just happen to be a troll that works for another company that wishes to some degree that you were union secretly and never make any comment except for a negative one. You say you're a troll. That's all you are. I want to be very blunt with this. I see this all the time. The representation gap is real. The representation gap is the number of people who would like to be represented by a union but are not, because a significant amount of work goes into it when it comes to how do I organize. You look at all you really need to do is look at our labor law is weak. It's feckless. And it's unfortunate because it really needs to be ramped up. There are so many people that are on Starbucks or whether it's Amazon that have come together to collectively bargain, have won their elections, and the companies that they're in with are stalling. It needs, we have a serious problem with labor in our country. And the second that you fix the labor law issue, or the second that people get to the point where their backs are against the wall, things might change. But until then, we have some significant problems. All right. Lastly, before I end this podcast episode, thank you for listening or watching. If you are a UPS driver, I would love to actually have some conversations with some of y'all because I just put out, my podcast is just me sitting here talking about things that are interesting to me. I am in the trades, and it's a very unique time because I'm seeing this it's almost like a cultural phenomenon for people to be talking about the trades in a positive light. after 4 decades of it being negative. But I'm also interested in unionism in general, right? And I'm also interested in the workforce. And there's a whole bunch of things that I'm really interested in when it comes to just having conversations and looking into stuff. And part of that would be actually talking to potential, guests on a platform like this where I could sit here and I just want to hear your story, right? Talk to me about what it's like to be an everyday average UPS driver. If you're adamantly against a buyout, I'd be curious to talk to you. If you're for it, I'd be curious to hear your the reasons why, right? Might be that you're getting older and you can't retire quite yet, but your body's, broke up, whatever it happens to be. I extend the invitation to anyone who would like to have a conversation. I would, certainly like to hear from, those of you who are very interested in, maybe sharing your story and just talking. One of the things that we don't do enough is talk about, our work. And I'm not saying complain. I'm saying having an honest conversation about what's taking place, what's going on, the troubles, the difficulties, because you can be sure that the companies you work for, when they want to get something done, in this case UPS, they share information and they get it out there, and information is key at this point. So the driver experience, I'd be curious to have a conversation. So if you are a UPS driver and you're willing to have a conversation with me, just go ahead and don't share. You can say that you'd like to have a conversation in the comments, but I still have to be able to communicate with you email. I don't want to do it over the comment section. So I'll leave a link in the description, just a special link that takes you right to the contact page where you can go and fill out a form and it'll send me an email, and I'd love to have a conversation with you. But if that is you and that sounds interesting, please do me the favor and reach out. Let's have a conversation. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And lastly, before I jump off of here, for those of you who are interested, you need to know something. I am getting ready to go on what we call a shutdown in the construction industry. I'm going to be working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for at least the next month. So if you are looking to, have a conversation with me, it is going to be in the late evening. Let's say 8 o'clock in the evening, Eastern time. That may not be a problem if you're on the West Coast. It might be a problem if you're on the East Coast, but maybe it's not. However it happens to flesh out, I just wanted to let you know that. After that shutdown coming up, I will be going to a 3 or 4 month job, something to that effect, where I'm going to be working a significant amount of overtime as well. So if that's the case, just putting it out there, thanks for taking the time to listen or watch the podcast, however you consume your content. As always, I'll see you on the next one, and stay safe out there.